This was the first few seconds of the iconic opening scene from the 1996 horror classic, Scream. Not only did this scene highlight a fear that many people may have not known they had, a stranger randomly calling you while simultaneously watching you from outside your house and being an absolute menace.
Listen, asshole!
No, you listen, you little bitch. You hang up on me again, I'll gut you like a fish.
But it also represents just how Scream was able to revitalize the dying slasher genre in the mid-90s. In the opening scene alone, Scream shows its self-awareness, realistic characters, and subversion of expectations, with these three things helping it to pay homage and respect to the classics that came before it, while also pointing out everything wrong with the genre as a whole. So with that being said, spoiler warning if you haven't seen the movie, and this is how Scream saved the slasher genre.
The same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act.
By the time the mid-90s rolled around, the slasher genre was kinda down bad, which is largely due to the fact that the same formula with the same generic slasher movie tropes was being used over and over again, with a few exceptions of course. A psychopath hunts teens that are actually in their 20s, with the innocent virgin girl being the only one to survive. Pretty much there were a lot of movies after Black Christmas, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, and Friday the 13th that wanted to be just like them.
He copied my whole fucking flow! Word for word, bar for bar!
This leads us to Scream. Now in case you haven't seen it, Scream starts off with a town being shaken up after two teens are murdered by a killer in a Ghostface mask. Ghostface, who likes to anonymously call his victims and play horror movie trivia.
Name the killer in Friday the 13th.
Jason!
Denied! Sit down!
Sydney, whose mother was killed a year ago, becomes the killer's next target when he calls and tries to kill her while she's home alone. Her boyfriend Billy becomes the prime suspect when he just so happens to appear right when Ghostface stops chasing her, and coincidentally has a phone on him. Yeah, this was a big deal at the time. As the movie progresses and more people die, the town tries to figure out who the killer is, with the local deputy, Dewey, and reporter Gail Weathers leading the investigation. Now the major twist of the movie comes when it's discovered that Ghostface is actually two people, Sydney's boyfriend Billy, and Stu, the goddamn goofball. Billy and Stu then reveal that they were the ones who killed Sydney's mom and framed another man for it because Sydney's mom was having an affair with Billy's dad, which caused his mom to leave them. And their big plan was to kill Sydney on the 1-year anniversary of her mom's death and frame her dad for it. And yeah, that shit didn't work.
Let's go!
Now on the surface, Scream is your typical murder mystery movie, and like many slashers before it, it involves a killer hunting teens and a final girl. But what made it so unique at the time was that it was one of the first horror movies where horror movies existed in the movie. The characters know about Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, and slasher movies in general. They, along with the movie, are self-aware. And this self-awareness starts right away in the opening scene of the movie when Ghostface asks Casey about her favorite scary movie.
What's your favorite scary movie?
Halloween. You know, the one with the guy in the white mask who walks around and stalks babysitters.
From the jump, the movie is making it very clear that the horror movies we all know and love exist in this world, and it continuously emphasizes this point as the story goes on, with tons of references to other horror movies.
It's alive!
Nightmare on Elm Street.
The killer could easily be female. Basic instinct. I was thinking Tom Cruise and all the right moves. You know, if you pause it just right, you can see his penis.
Bruh.
That werewolf movie with E.T.'s mom in it?
The Howling. See, the police are always off track with this shit. If they'd watch Prom Night, they'd save time.
Terror Train, Prom Night. How come Jamie Lee Curtis is in all of his movies?
Seriously, there's a shit ton of references in this movie. But Scream doesn't just reference horror movies, it uses the characters' knowledge of these movies to navigate through the plot.
There's a formula to it.
It's a pretty well known idea that for the most part, horror movie characters are kind of dumb. Oftentimes they operate as if they've never seen a horror movie. Unlike the audience, they don't know the cliches and what not to do. They don't know the rules. Scream's characters, on the other hand, clearly outline the rules of slasher movies and show that they realize there's a formula.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. Number 1, you can never have sex. Number 2, you can never drink or do drugs. And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, say, I'll be right back.
Scream's self-awareness allows it to show love to the classics that came before it, while also pointing out the cliches of the slasher genre as a whole. One of my favorite sequences of the movie is near the end when Halloween is just playing in the background of some pretty tense moments. And there's a specific moment where Randy is telling Jamie Lee Curtis to turn around and see what's behind her, while Ghostface is literally right behind him and about to kill him. He also happens to not get killed after not turning around. I think this is a good representation of Scream taking influence from movies like Halloween, while also getting rid of outdated formulas.
Don't you blame the movies? Movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative.
The self-awareness of Scream's characters leads right into why I think they're pretty realistic. Of course they're not perfect, but they're better than a lot of the dry-ass characters from previous slashers. Not only do the characters know the rules of the horror movies, they use their knowledge to their advantage. This is why none of the characters really do anything dumb during the movie. There's still a few suspect moments. I feel like anytime a character dies in this movie, it's more because they got overpowered or ran out of options rather than them making a bad decision. For example, before Ghostface kills Sydney's friend Tatum, she tries to escape through a dog door in the garage. Now this might sound stupid, but she legitimately had no other options because Ghostface was guarding the only door, and this was after she fought him off. Casey Becker only dies in the opening scene because she can't outrun Ghostface after putting up a good effort to survive. A lot of times, horror movie characters don't realize what's going on in the movie until it's too late. Because these characters already know what story they're in, they can make solid decisions. And I think that this just makes the characters more likable. The main character, Sydney, is resourceful as hell, so I actually root for her to survive, as opposed to me just not caring about her because she makes dumb choices. Then you have Randy, who knows everything about horror movie logic and constantly talks about there being a formula, which just makes him relatable to the audience that knows the formula he's talking about.
Careful. This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
I think the idea of realistic characters also extends to the main villain, Ghostface. Stupid! Instead of being some supernatural, overpowered character, it's just two psychotic teenagers that take influence from the scary movies they've seen. And I think there's something even more scary about that. It just feels more real, and gives you an example of horror movies affecting people in a really negative way.
It's all a movie. It's all one great big movie.
We can once again go back to the opening scene in the movie to see how Scream saved slasher movies. The whole scene is pretty wild, as a creepy phone call leads to Casey getting gutted and hung. But what I think is most interesting about this scene is that it even happens in the first place. If you're anything like me, then when you saw Drew Barrymore at the beginning of this movie, you immediately thought she would be the main character. I feel like movies have just trained us to identify main characters based on certain characteristics. Even if you didn't know Drew Barrymore, she's still an innocent blonde girl wearing a sweater. But Kevin Williamson, the writer of Scream, pretty much says fuck whatever you thought this was, and kills her in the first 15 minutes of the movie.
Oh my god.
Immediately, Scream does the opposite of what you expected would happen. Scream also subverts expectations by constantly turning you away from obvious suspects. The main example of this is with Billy. From the moment we're introduced to Billy, something is just off about him. He's weird.
Thought maybe we could do a little on top of the clothes stuff.
Hey yo, what the fuck?
And I would assume that he would be a lot of people's first guess as to who Ghostface is. But the movie does things that make you think that it can't be him. When Billy becomes the prime suspect, Ghostface calls Sydney and tells her that they got the wrong guy. There's also the fact that he gets fake killed by Stu in the Ghostface costume before we know that they're both the killers. So when I found out Billy was actually involved, I was just like, damn. There's even a point where Dewey seems suspicious. The movie constantly goes against what you think is going to happen, which makes it that much better. Oh, and the final girl isn't a virgin.
Now you're no longer a virgin.
Scream was a game changer. I don't think it holds up to some of the modern horror movies of today, and the premise is actually pretty simple. And it wasn't even the first horror movie to have horror movies exist in its story, but it was unique in that it clearly outlined the rules of the genre and made the idea of a slasher almost seem mythical. And overall, I think it's a really fun time. But let me know what you guys thought about Scream down in the comments, and drop a like if you enjoyed the video. Love you, bye.